Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be exploring happiness,
Happiness.
but not just, your everyday, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. We're going deeper,
Yeah, much deeper.
much deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at cultures around the world and how they approach happiness,
Not just how long they live.
not just how long they live.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to guide us on this journey, we're going to be looking at
Dan Buettner.
Dan Buettner's book, Thrive.
Yes.
And we're really focusing on Denmark
Singapore.
and
A little bit of California.
Yeah, so think of this deep dive as less of a how-to guide
Absolutely.
and more of kind of a journey to,
to inspire your own thinking about happiness.
yeah, inspire your own thinking. Because I think most of us, if we really sat down and thought, okay, what is happiness?
Yeah. What is it really?
We'd probably think, it's just feeling good all the time, right?
I think so.
But it's actually way more nuanced.
It is. Happiness experts actually break it down into percentages.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sonja Lyubomirsky, one of the leading researchers, she says 50% is genetic, so that's already half of it.
Wow.
Then 10% is from our circumstances,
Right.
like where we live, what we do for work, things like that.
Right.
But the remaining 40%,
Okay.
that's the good stuff. That's what we do.
That's what we can control.
What we have the most control over.
Exactly.
Oh, that's good news. I like that. So we have some power.
We do.
But first, let's bust a myth. Okay?
Let's do it.
Money
Money.
doesn't buy happiness.
At least not in the way we think.
Not in the way we often think, right?
Right.
Like we all, I think, sometimes fantasize, oh, if I just win the lottery,
Yeah.
all my problems will be solved.
All my problems will be gone. I'll be happy.
I'll be happy. I'll be on a beach somewhere.
Exactly.
But researchers, Ed Diener and Bruno Frey, they found that while money can help,
Of course, up to a point.
up to a point,
Right.
like you need to fulfill basic needs.
Exactly. You need to feel secure.
Secure.
But beyond that,
Yeah.
the super rich folks aren't that much happier than everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something people maybe don't want to admit.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Right.
Because we
We
do.
put a lot of emphasis.
We think if I could just get that promotion or that raise.
Right. Or that new car or that bigger house.
Exactly. Then I'll finally be happy.
Right. Well,
It's more about fulfilling those needs and desires.
not just accumulating things.
Exactly.
Okay. So are you ready to dive into some cultures that really seem to get this happiness thing right?
Absolutely.
Even if they aren't perfect utopias.
No place is perfect.
No place is perfect.
But they have some really interesting insights.
Yeah. So let's start with the place that I think is known for happiness,
Okay.
but it might surprise some people.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Denmark.
Denmark.
Interesting.
So now here's where I think we get into some of the cultural quirks.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Danes, they're happy,
They are.
but you're not going to see them just like grinning at strangers on the street.
Right.
In fact, that can actually be seen as a faux pas.
Yeah, you don't smile at people you don't know.
Huh. That's so different from
Like
the U.S.
I know we're,
Supposed to be super friendly.
yeah, you're supposed to be super friendly, make eye contact, smile.
So why is that?
Well, this is where this idea called janteloven comes into play.
Janteloven. What is that?
It's also known as the law of Jante.
Okay.
And this was described by sociologist Peter Gundelach.
Okay.
And it's really deeply embedded in Danish culture.
So what does it mean?
So basically it means don't think you're better than anyone else.
Don't think you're better than anyone else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, that can sound a little restrictive.
Yeah, like you can't stand out.
Right? Like you can't stand out. You shouldn't boast.
Don't brag.
Yeah.
Okay.
But here's the really fascinating part.
Okay. I'm listening.
This emphasis on not standing out
Yeah.
actually leads to really high levels of trust.
Really?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, think about it. If everyone's kind of on the same level, there's less of a sense of competition.
Right.
Less of a sense of trying to one-up each other.
Less keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's this feeling of we're all in this together.
We're all in the same boat.
Yeah. And that leads to lower crime rates,
Okay.
feeling safe in your community.
That makes sense.
And those are huge factors in overall happiness.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Feeling safe and secure in your community is definitely a big plus.
Absolutely. So speaking of Danish happiness, we can't forget
Hig.
Hig.
Yes.
So it's not just about those cozy gatherings and, the candlelight and the deep conversations with friends.
Right.
It's almost like a cultural survival technique during those long winters.
It's like a coping mechanism for the darkness.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
about creating that atmosphere of warmth, connection, intimacy.
Especially during those dark months.
Yeah. So do you think Higgs is something that could translate to other cultures?
I think it's something that people crave universally.
Yeah.
but the way it's expressed might differ.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to kind of paint a picture of this for our listeners,
Yes.
do you remember that anecdote from Buettner's book about the dinner party
Oh,
at
yes.
Ledreborg Palace?
With the royalty.
Yes.
Dressed in jeans.
Dressed in jeans.
I love that.
That's so funny, right?
It's down to earth.
Even with their titles, their wealth.
It challenges our perceptions of status and happiness, for sure.
It does, right? We think, oh, royalty, they must always be so formal, so proper.
We're so buttoned up.
But there they are in jeans,
Just hanging out.
having a good time.
So human.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to this idea that happiness isn't about,
Material possessions.
not about the outward show of things.
It's something deeper.
And another really interesting point was from Countess Marie Holstein-Ledreborg.
Oh, yes. She's considered one of the happiest people in Denmark.
Right. And she really emphasized overcoming hardship
Overcoming hardship.
as being key to her happiness.
Wow.
Yeah, so it makes you think about resilience,
Yeah.
right? How we bounce back from those challenges.
How we grow from those tough times.
Exactly. It's not about avoiding the difficult times in life.
It's about navigating them.
Yeah, and maybe even finding meaning in them.
Finding the lessons.
Yeah, so we've got this kind of cozy contentment of Denmark.
Yes.
But shall we shift gears a little bit?
Yeah, let's go somewhere completely different.
Let's go to the super efficient world of Singapore.
Singapore.
The ultra-organized world of Singapore,
Fascinating.
right? It begs the question, can a society that is so focused on order, on achievement, also be a happy one?
That's a great question.
Right.
And I think that's what we're here to explore.
Because at first glance, Singapore might seem
Too perfect.
Too perfect. Like, is that even possible?
Right.
But I think we have to remember, we can't impose our own ideas of happiness
Yes.
on another culture.
Right. What happiness should look like.
Exactly.
It might be different in different places.
Absolutely.
So in Singapore, there's a big focus on what's called the 5 C's.
The 5 C's? What are those?
Cash, car, condo.
Credit card and country club.
So it's about material success.
Well, it might sound that way on the surface.
Right. But there's a cultural context here.
Yeah.
These are seen as ways to provide security
For your family.
for your family.
Right. And to fulfill societal expectations.
Which are very strong in Singapore.
Yeah. And these are deeply ingrained values.
They are.
So when we talk about those expectations,
Yeah.
we have to talk about Lee Kuan Yew.
Lee Kuan Yew, the architect of modern Singapore.
Exactly. He's a very controversial figure.
He is.
But you can't deny his impact.
Right. His insights are crucial for understanding how Singapore became what it is today.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So after Singapore gained independence, he knew they faced huge challenges.
They had to be adaptable.
Right.
They had to find their niche, their
Yeah.
place on the world stage.
Yeah. And so for him, education and economic relevance were really paramount.
They were key to his vision.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to contrast that with Denmark,
Right.
which is so relaxed, so community focused,
Morgan. Right.
versus this very structured, very driven society.
Right.
But I'm curious, even within this very structured society,
Yeah.
are individuals finding their own paths to happiness?
Yeah. And that's what I think is so fascinating is that even in a place like Singapore, you see those individual stories emerge.
Give me an example.
So for instance, there's Jenny Chua,
Jenny Chua.
who had this incredible success in the business world.
Okay.
But now she really focuses on giving back to the community.
Interesting. So a shift in priorities.
Yeah. And maybe even a generational shift.
Yeah, maybe the younger generation is looking for something more than just
Material success.
climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
They want to make a difference.
Yeah. And then there's Douglas Fu,
Douglas Fu.
who's known as the Happy Sushi King.
The Happy Sushi King. I love that.
Right.
What's his story?
So he built his business on compassion
Okay.
and empowering his employees.
That's great.
Yeah. So it challenges this idea that success has to come at the expense of personal fulfillment. You don't have to be ruthless to get to the top.
Right. You can actually lead with your heart.
With compassion.
Yeah, and still be successful.
I like that.
So I think these are some really important nuances.
They are.
But Singapore also raises this bigger question.
What's that?
Is this model sustainable long term?
That is the question.
Right. Because what happens when individual desires start to clash
Right.
with this emphasis on social order?
That's a great point.
Right.
Something to think about.
Yeah, definitely something to ponder. So for our last stop in this first part of our deep dive,
Okay.
let's go to a place that really challenges our assumptions about happiness.
Okay. I'm ready.
Mexico.
Mexico.
So Mexico, it's full of contradictions, right?
In what way?
You've got economic hardship, you've got crime, you've got corruption,
Right.
but the people consistently report really high levels of happiness.
Really?
How is that possible?
It's fascinating, right?
It is.
How can they be so happy?
So one key ingredient seems to be their unique sense of humor.
Humor. They use laughter to cope.
They really do. It's like ingrained in their culture.
So they find joy even in difficult situations.
Even in the face of adversity.
That's powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the importance of family
Of course.
and faith in Mexican culture.
Huge sources of support.
Right. It gives them that sense of meaning.
Especially when times are tough.
Exactly. So it's not just about seeking solace.
Right.
It's also about finding ways to process those tough realities.
For fine strength.
Yeah, and that's where I think this example of Brozo the creepy clown comes in.
Brozo the creepy clown.
He's a TV personality.
Okay.
And he uses humor
To do what?
to actually expose corruption.
Wow.
So it's this kind of cathartic release for the viewers.
So they can laugh at the absurdity of it all?
Exactly.
To process it?
Right. It's a way to kind of deal with these really tough issues.
Through humor.
Through humor.
That's amazing.
It is. And then to further illustrate this resilience,
Yes.
think about that Monterey neighborhood that Nicole Fuentes studied.
Okay, what about it?
So they face poverty, they face crime,
Right.
but they find happiness in those simple pleasures.
Like what?
Like spending time with their families,
Okay.
having those strong community ties.
Those connections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that happiness doesn't always have to be about these huge achievements.
The big milestones.
Right.
It can be about the little things.
It can be about finding joy in everyday moments.
The everyday beauty.
Exactly. And then there's the story of La Nina,
La Nina.
who's this teenage healer.
A teenage healer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she draws these massive crowds.
Wow.
Even skeptical doctors are amazed.
Really?
Yeah. It makes you think about the power of belief.
The power of belief.
Right. So whether or not you believe that she has real power,
Right.
the faith that people place in her clearly has an impact on their well-being.
It affects how they feel.
Right. And it even maybe impacts their physical health.
That's the placebo effect.
Exactly. It shows how powerful our beliefs can be.
Our minds are powerful.
They are. So it's this great example of how culture influences,
How we understand healing.
yeah, and well-being.
Yeah.
So before we get too philosophical,
All right.
we have one more stop on our global happiness tour.
Okay. Lead the way.
And for our listeners in the U.S., this one's a bit closer to home.
Oh, let's hear it.
San Luis Obispo, California.
San Luis Obispo.
So we're not just talking beaches and sunshine here.
Okay.
This town actually designed itself for happiness.
Really?
Yeah, and we're going to dive into how they did that and what lessons we can learn from them in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready when you are.
Welcome back to our deep dive into happiness around the world.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, for those cozy Hig havens of Denmark,
Yes.
to the efficient streets of Singapore,
Yeah.
the resilient communities of Mexico.
Exactly.
And now we're landing in sunny San Luis Obispo, California,
San Luis Obispo.
which is a town that took a really deliberate approach
intentional.
to fostering happiness.
It's not just about the good vibes and the beach days, though.
Right. Although those probably help.
They probably do.
Right.
But they actually actively shaped their environment
To support well-being.
to support the well-being of their residents. Exactly.
And so what I think is so interesting is that their journey to becoming one of the happiest cities in the U.S.
According to Gallup Healthways.
Right. It all started with a fight.
A fight.
A fight.
Okay.
For something that really transformed the town's landscape
Oh, really?
and its sense of community.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The Mission Plaza.
Ah, the heart of SLO.
It is. Tell us about this battle for the plaza.
So back in the 1950s and 60s, San Luis Obispo, like many towns,
Yeah.
prioritized car traffic and business interests.
Right. So very car-centric.
Very car-centric, and Highway 101, a major freeway,
Okay.
cut right through the heart of town,
Oh, wow.
passing right in front of the historic Mission.
It's hard to imagine that now.
I know, right? With the plaza being such a pedestrian-friendly space.
Yeah, everyone's walking around with all these shops and restaurants.
Such a vibrant gathering place.
Yeah. So how did that transformation even happen?
Well, it's largely thanks to Kenneth Schwartz,
Okay.
a former mayor who really had this vision
Okay.
for a space where people could connect, enjoy the outdoors,
Right.
and experience a sense of shared history.
But I imagine not everyone was on board with this vision.
You're right, there was pushback.
Right.
Some business owners worried about losing parking spaces, disrupting traffic flow,
So it's that classic
progress versus tradition.
Right. So how did Schwartz get this project off the ground?
Well, he was a skilled politician, but it was actually a group of Cal Poly students.
College students.
Yes.
How did they get involved in urban planning?
It all started as a class project.
Okay.
They were tasked with coming up with a plan for the area around the mission.
Okay.
And the city council at the time was still dominated by this pro-highway faction.
Right, so they were kind of stuck in their ways.
Yeah, they were resistant to change.
Oh, right.
And they basically instructed the students to improve the area but keep the highway open.
So work within the existing constraints.
Exactly.
Right.
But the students, they came up with this really bold idea.
What was that?
Close the highway
Oh, wow.
and create a pedestrian plaza.
Okay, so that's quite a departure from their
A
instructions.
little bit.
I bet that didn't go over well.
You would be correct.
Okay.
So the students all dressed up in their best suits.
Okay.
They presented their plan at a public hearing.
Okay.
And the mayor, who was vehemently against closing the highway,
Right.
he let them present for a few minutes, and then he just shouted,
Oh, no.
"You haven't done what we asked.
Oh.
We want our money back."
Ouch.
Yeah, it was pretty harsh.
That must have been so disheartening for the students.
It was a really tense moment, but then something amazing happened.
Okay.
A former city attorney in the audience,
Okay.
he stood up and said, "If they persist, I will represent you at no cost."
Wow.
Yeah, talk about a turning point.
What a moment.
It was incredible,
Yeah.
and that sparked public outrage. Really?
People realized they had a voice.
Right.
They could actually shape their community.
And that's so powerful.
So powerful. And you know what happened? A referendum was held.
Okay.
And the vote to close the highway and create the Mission Plaza.
Did it pass?
It passed by a landslide.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a huge victory for the people of SLO.
So it's this great example of how a seemingly small event
Right.
can really empower citizens and lead to lasting change.
And it really speaks to the power of vision, too.
Right,
You know, Kenneth Schwartz might not have single-handedly created the Mission Plaza,
right.
but he planted the seed.
He had that vision.
He had that vision, and the community brought it to life.
Yeah, so the Mission Plaza became the symbol of citizen empowerment.
It did.
How did that translate into SLO becoming a haven for happiness?
Well, the plaza's success had this ripple effect.
Okay.
People realized they could actually shape their environment,
Right.
advocate for what they valued,
Yeah.
and it created this culture of active citizenship, which is so important.
So important for community well-being.
It's about feeling like you have a stake in where you live,
Exactly.
right? Like your voice matters.
Your opinion matters.
Yeah, and that can be incredibly empowering.
Absolutely. And so that sense of empowerment led to this wave of progressive initiatives in SLO.
Like what?
Well, they banned drive-through fast food restaurants.
Okay.
They prioritized open spaces,
Okay.
and they implemented strict clean air legislation.
So they were really making these conscious choices
Very intentional choice.
to promote health
Sustainability.
and community.
Absolutely.
It's like they were creating this happiness ecosystem.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just these top-down initiatives.
Right.
SLO has a really strong volunteer culture.
Wow.
People are actively engaged in making their town a better place to live.
It's interesting how that kind of echoes what we saw in Denmark
Right.
with that community involvement.
That sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah. Do you think SLO's model is replicable?
That's a tough question. Because SLO has this unique set of circumstances.
Right.
Its size, its location, its demographics.
But do you think the underlying principles?
I think the underlying principles are definitely transferable.
What are those?
Empowering citizens,
Okay.
fostering a sense of belonging,
Okay.
and prioritizing well-being over purely economic interests.
And I think we also have to remember the importance of beauty in nature,
Of course.
right? SLO is this visually stunning place
Absolutely.
surrounded by rolling hills vineyards.
It's idyllic.
It sounds like paradise. But even in paradise, there are challenges.
There are always challenges.
Buettner mentions this labor pool system
Oh, yes, where people trade skills.
to afford living there.
It's fascinating, right?
It is. It speaks to that creativity
And that resilience.
of the people who live there.
Absolutely.
But it also highlights those trade-offs
Right.
that people make in pursuit of happiness.
Living in a place like SLO often comes with sacrifices.
Right. It's not always easy,
And it's not a perfect fit for everyone.
right? Like Stephanie Mead's story.
Oh, yes,
She
definitely.
initially struggled.
To find her place in SLO.
Yeah, she felt out of sync with the laid-back vibe.
And a little overwhelmed by the hippie culture.
It wasn't her scene.
But then she found her flow.
Through the wine industry.
Yes, through the wine industry.
And I think that's a really crucial point.
What's that?
Happiness isn't one size fits all.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you,
Within your context.
aligning your passions with your environment.
And her story also highlights the social and purpose-driven nature
Of the wine industry.
of the wine industry.
Right.
It's not just about making a living.
It's about being part of a community.
Right. Contributing to something larger than yourself.
That sense of purpose,
Yeah.
of making a difference, is a powerful driver of happiness.
And I think that's something we saw in all 4 of the cultures we explored.
We did. It's a common thread.
That runs through these very different happiness tapestries.
I like that analogy.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive,
What are your final thoughts on the similarities and differences between these places?
well, I think it's remarkable how these very different cultures
Yeah.
can arrive at similar conclusions
About happiness.
about what contributes to happiness.
Right.
You know, while the specific expressions may vary,
Right.
the underlying values
Yeah?
of community purpose connection.
Those seem to be pretty universal.
I think so.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into happiness around the world.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has from the Hidge Havens of Denmark to the efficient streets of Singapore.
Those resilient communities in Mexico.
And, of course, the intentional happiness of San Luis Obispo.
So many different approaches.
Right. And I think what's been so fascinating is that along the way, we've uncovered
Surprising commonality.
surprising commonalities.
Yeah.
Like these cultures that seem so different on the surface,
Right.
they actually have these core values.
That contribute to happiness.
Yeah, that contribute to happiness.
Yeah.
So we saw that emphasis on trust in Denmark,
Right.
family and community in Mexico.
The role of purpose in San Luis Obispo.
Right. It seems like it's really about more than just...
Chasing those fleeting moments of joy.
Right. It's about creating a life.
That has meaning,
Yeah.
connection,
Resilience.
a sense of belonging.
It's about weaving all of those things.
I said the fabric of our lives.
Yeah. And it brings us to the most important question.
What's that?
What about you?
You listening right now.
What does your happiness recipe look like?
And we're not talking about a literal recipe here.
Right. Although a delicious meal can certainly boost your mood.
It can definitely help.
But we're talking about
Reflecting on what truly brings you joy.
Yeah.
What gives your life purpose.
what makes you feel alive.
So think back to the cultures we've explored.
Mhm.
Which one resonated with you the most?
Right. Was there a particular place
A particular approach.
that you thought?
I could see myself doing that. Or I already do that, and I love it.
So maybe it's that Danish concept of Hidge.
Creating those cozy moments of connection
Yeah.
with loved ones.
Or maybe it's that Singaporean focus on building a really secure foundation for your family.
Providing that stability.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the Mexican embrace of humor and resilience.
Finding joy even in the face of challenges.
Yeah. Or maybe it's that San Luis Obispo spirit of actively shaping your environment.
To support well-being.
Yeah. So the key takeaway here is that happiness, it's a journey,
Not a destination.
not a destination, and it's a journey you don't have to take alone.
We can all learn from each other.
Right.
Inspire each other.
Support each other along the way.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into happiness around the world,
Yeah.
just remember
You have the power.
to shape your own happiness.
Absolutely.
Cultivate those connections that matter to you.
Embrace your passions.
Find that purpose that really makes your heart sing.
And remember, there's no one right way to be happy.
It's about finding what works for you.
In your own unique way.
Exactly. So until next time, keep those knowledge-seeking spirits high, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.